Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here. Welcome back. Well, this is the final lecture. It's actually more of a quiz review than a lecture of the semester in History 1060. So it's been a great semester, and I know we had some hiccups at the beginning with the textbook and with Inquisitive. So I appreciate everyone's patience as we worked through those things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to review the final quiz. And for the due date on that, refer to the syllabus. I'll probably reuse this video, so I'm going to leave the due date off of the video. But review the syllabus, and this quiz covers chapter 21 and 22, and with a couple of other questions, and I'm going to go through the questions with you. It's fairly straightforward, and like our other quizzes, there's no time limit on it. You can start, leave, whatever. But it's not a comprehensive final by any means. It's just a quiz that covers two chapters. And these are important chapters because they kind of get us into the present day. The one thing I don't like about this class is that we have to jam everything into 15 weeks, so we end up not really understanding anything. But at the same time, the final two chapters are about globalization, and it's really, all of it takes place, at least in my lifetime, and with a lot of implications for you right now if you're a younger person. So let's go ahead and dig in. And again, I'm not really going to go over the chapters. I'm just going to go over the quiz questions. It's a multiple choice. I think there's one true and false, and it's 10 questions, so it's 100 points total. So, but one of the things, so we're talking about globalization, right? And one of the things chapter 21 starts with is this idea of, why did global markets go crazy in the 1990s? So in the 1970s, when I was in high school, foreign-made goods were like a rare thing, and it was a big deal. Like I remember seeing the first Honda where I grew up, and it was a big deal, this car made in Japan. But by the 1990s, globalization had accelerated, whereas a Honda and a Ford, they were both kind of made from global parts in different parts of the world, and it didn't make that much difference. But beyond that, the European Union also was formed and expanded during this period of time. So you're going to see a question about why did the globalization of these markets accelerate in the 1990s? And the big answer here is because of the end of the Cold War. And that's covered in your book. It's real simple, but please understand, before 1989, trade to most of Eastern Europe wasn't open. So this idea of the ending of the Cold War leading to the globalization of markets in the 90s is what you need to know as you walk away from this. So that's the question there. And then the next question, again, has to do with this idea of the collapse of the Soviet bloc in the late 1980s. And so the real simple question here is, what was one of the reasons that the Soviet bloc collapsed? Now, there were many of them. The big one was trying to pay for their defense budget. But really, as far as internal pressures go, the USSR really never was able to compete to produce like consumer products and provide health care to their citizens, even their middle class citizens, not like the Western countries did. And in the end, if you don't have a happy constituency, there's going to be revolution, or at least vote for change. So one of the important things to take away from the collapse of the Cold War is not only the unsustainable defense budget, but is also the inability to rise up the middle class to produce like consumer goods and take care of the population through healthcare. Some of the issues we talk about in this country. So keep that one in mind. And then as you go through decolonization in these chapters, so you'll read it. You already read about independence for India. In chapter 22, you started to read about the hostility between India and Pakistan. But one thing I want you to take away from the course is this idea of South Africa and what happens after decolonization in South Africa after World War II. And I think most of you have heard of Nelson Mandela. Probably all of you know who he was, but just keep in mind that he was the first majority ruler in South Africa in a long time in 1994. And his story's a good one because he went to prison for several years and was really this nonviolent sort of a poster person of nonviolent resistance. So important to know that one individual, all right, can persevere and eventually realize his dream and make things better for everyone else. So that's important. And the next question is about China and why did it rapidly expand all of a sudden as an economic powerhouse? I mean, what happened for that to occur? So when I was growing up, nothing was made in China. I mean, China, you just wasn't anything like in the 60s or 70s or anything like that. And my thesis for my master's degree was about Nixon, Kissinger, and Mao Zedong normalizing relations between China and the U.S. So when that happened, the leader after Mao Zedong was Deng Xiaoping, and he opened China to foreign trade and investment in the late 1970s. And after that, well, you know what happened after that. So now China makes the world's goods for the most part. But again, why did this happen? It just wasn't random. It was a decision of a person, all right, Deng Xiaoping, who said, hey, we're going to open China up to the outside world into foreign trade and investment, and really pioneered this idea of communism and capitalism sort of living together in this pseudo-state-controlled framework. So it's really interesting, but there is a question about that in the quiz, so make sure you know that. The Iranian Revolution in 1979, think about this as an action-reaction, but also think about Western influence in the Middle East after World War II. And I think the long and short of it is that the U.S. installed the Shah of Iran back in the 50s. So basically the U.S. put a puppet governor or a puppet leader to lead Iran, and he was the Shah of Iran. And he became sort of a brutal dictator that lived this very ostentatious lifestyle. And eventually the people of Iran, especially the fundamentalist, the fundamentalist academics, that fundamentalists in the sense that they were conservative Muslims, rose up against the Shah of Iran, and not only did they not like the Shah, but they hated the U.S. and they really felt like the Western influence that the U.S. was bringing to the world was immoral, and this idea of Iran hating the U.S. and the West to this day is still there. So the question here is about the Iranian Revolution, because before 1979, Iran was a partner to the U.S. with this puppet leader, and then the Iranian Revolution happens in 1979, and the Ayatollah Khomeini takes over, and Iran is really turned into this very conservative bastion of Islam, as it is today. But the question is about why did this revolution occur? And the answer is it occurred because of the ongoing oppression and really the ostentatious lifestyle of the U.S. installed Shah of Iran. There's a question about the war on terror in 2001. So some of you were alive for that. Some of you maybe weren't yet. But the answer or the question is, why the war on terror? What was this a response to? Why did we, the U.S., want to hunt down Osama bin Laden? And it, of course, is a response to the 9/11 attacks. That's an easy question, sort of a throwaway, but you should know that. When you read the chapters, and I don't know if it's in 21 or 22, but I think it's at the end of 21, there's a primary source in there, which is a copy of Greta Thunberg's speech. She is the young climate activist, and there's a copy of her UN speech in there, and it's not very long. So just read through that, because there's three questions, or three, I guess, answers on one question, a multiple choice about Greta Thunberg's address to the UN. And of course, this was the question I chose that really relates to climate change and concerns of people that were not doing enough about climate change. And if you're familiar with Greta Thunberg, you know that she's a very young activist who has made a big splash in the world when it comes to the UN Climate Action Summit and some of the other places where she has spoke. So there was a question in there about Greta Thunberg, so make sure you know where that is at in the ebook. You know, you can always just search these keywords in the ebook and find the question fairly easily, so it's really not that difficult. There's a question in here about Hong Kong and ongoing problems in Hong Kong. And this is an important question because I think, soon there may be more to this story. And, who knows? But the U.S. defends Hong Kong, defends their right to be a democratic nation. But it's not that easy because China really has ownership now, and China wants to control everything. And it's a difficult situation because Hong Kong was really it was westernized. I mean, it was owned by the Brits for 156 years and given back to China. So read about that in chapter 22, but also know that ongoing problems in Hong Kong are related to China attempting to control the island nation, actually. So be aware of that. And then here's a question that's not in the book that I want you to be aware of. I think it's important. When we watch the news and we hear about Russia and we hear about the war in Ukraine, we think of Russia as this giant superpower because that's the way they have always been portrayed, as this huge superpower. But I think it's important to understand that Russia is very small. Okay, the economy of Russia, like the whole economy of the entire country, is smaller than the state of New York's economy, the state of Texas's economy, and the state of California's economy, separately, not all together. So, when we think about Russia as this big superpower, the bottom line is they really don't have any money. And the money they do have really comes from oil revenue. So I think as we speculate Russia in the future and what happens to Russia, I think it's going to be real important to see how that country shakes out as the demand for oil falls in the world, which it's doing right now. But I just want you to walk away from this class understanding that you hear about all these things in the news, and the Russian economy is super small, and it's really smaller than several of the states in the U.S. So that's an interesting fact, but I think it's important for you to know that. And also just kind of compare the Russian economy to the U.S. economy. The total GDP of Russia is like $1.3 trillion. Okay, the total GDP of the U.S. is over $20 trillion. So our economy is like 20, 30 times bigger, and the only one who comes close to us is China in the size of their economy. So know that, and then finally, just wanted to put in here a little note about the Middle East and the war on terror and some of the stuff we talked about earlier. And there's a question in here about the prison at Camp Bucca, and it was in the Middle East, so it was really known as the Qaeda School. And I want you to be aware of the fact that this place, the Qaeda School, during the war in Afghanistan and during the war in Iraq, was really kind of a training ground for terrorists. Because it was a jail or prison where a lot of anti-Western, anti-Shiite guys got together and sort of made plans, for the next reign of terror, which turned into ISIS. So we sort of went from Al Qaeda to locking up Al Qaeda to those guys all getting together again, forming ISIS, and sort of we see the system repeating itself again and again. So that's the final question. Make sure you know that the prison at Camp Bucca was called the Qaeda School because many members of ISIS were actually trained there as they got together. Not on purpose training, but just because they met and decided what their next moves were. So that's it for the 10-question quiz, the final quiz. If you have any questions for me prior to the quiz, please let me know. It's been a great semester. If you're watching this and you have any work outstanding, please finish it right away so you don't fail the course, because I have to turn in grades in about 2 weeks. So that's that. Take care. Be safe. See you later. Bye-bye.